Afternoon, everybody. Today at the briefing, I've got a special guest going to kick it off for us, USAID Administrator Gayle Smith, who you all seen before. She's going to give you an update on what USAID is doing to mitigate the effects of drought in Ethiopia. She'll be able to stick around for a couple of questions, and then we'll get on with the rest of the daily briefing. I will moderate the questions if you don't mind, so in the interest of time, please identify who you are, who you're with, and let's limit the follow-ups as best we can so we can keep things moving. With that, ma'am.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I imagine some of you have been following this phenomenon called El Nino, which is striking hard in a number of parts of the world, nowhere harder than in Ethiopia. We are also tracking its impacts in Latin America, and we are receiving information that it appears to be far worse in southern Africa than we had hoped. We began responding to the impacts in Ethiopia in the fall. We track these things looking at weather and market data. It is at the point now where over 10 million people are in need. The United States has to date provided $500 million. In January, I was able to join in Ethiopia the Secretary General of the United Nations, UN agencies, and the EU in a session where we collectively looked at what we needed to do. We are announcing today that we are going to take a step as a contribution to that in one that we hope will lead the rest of the international community, which is to deploy what we call a disaster assistance response team. This is a group of experts that allows us to take a response that has been robust to date, but to accelerate and expand it. Our aim, though, is different than it often is. Most times we deploy a DART at the height of an emergency. We are moving earlier in this case because we have found that there is real alignment between donors, NGOs, the government and UN agencies, that if we move very, very, very quickly, we can avert the worst impacts of this drought. Now, I don't want to underestimate the fact that it's already having impact. There have been losses to livestock. There are signs and growing signs of malnutrition. We are at risk of poor farmers invoking coping mechanisms and thus becoming poorer and more vulnerable over time. But again, the important thing here is this is almost an act of emergency prevention. If we move now, if other donors, if others move with us, we think we can do two things: avert the worst impacts and protect some of the development gains that that country has made over many years. The UN estimates that what is needed urgently over the next 3 months is $268 million. We are also moving seeds, $4 million worth of seeds very quickly now. This is another critical factor for farmers. Obviously, if they're able to make the planting season, they will not be dependent in the coming year. So our team will be led by a woman named Kate Farnsworth. She's one of our most experienced DART leaders. And again, what they will do is work with partners, the government, the UN agencies, to expand and accelerate the response to this. I will conclude just by reinforcing the point that this is something different. We are challenging the world not just to respond to human suffering, but to respond quickly enough to prevent something even worse. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Two quick things. You said, I think, that the need was $268 million.
For the next 3 months.
Yep. How much is the United States going to contribute toward that need? And then second, you talked about poor farmers adopting coping strategies that would make them even poorer. What do you mean by that?
Sure. On your first question, we've provided over $500 million to date, and we are prepared to look at more. As I say, we're doing the seeds now. Part of what a DART team does is, with other partners who are responding, looks at what the gaps are, what the needs are, where we need to respond, we will. But the other thing we are doing, and part of the reason we are announcing this in the way we are, is we are asking our partners in the donor community to move with us. So we will cover gaps as they are needed, but we're also working very hard to make sure other countries step up. What happens in a situation like this to those who are the most vulnerable, the extreme poor, is that if a harvest is short because of a drought, they have very few choices. They may be forced to sell their livestock. They may be forced even to sell their tools and implements. we've seen a lot of cases where they're forced to eat their seeds as a matter of survival. You get into a worst case scenario if they're forced to sell their land or abandon their land for temporary employment. Now, one of the things that's happened in Ethiopia, which we have been proud to support, but is something we are doing around the world much more in earnest, is work that we frame under the banner of resilience, which is designed to reduce the vulnerability of extremely poor people to the kinds of external shocks they experience all the time, right? Droughts, conflicts, whatever it may be. In the case of Ethiopia, there's been considerable progress of something called the Productive Safety Net Program, for example. We were able to visit it recently, where through harvesting small amounts of water that can be used for livestock, for people, and for agriculture, they can build a buffer so that when people face things like drought, they've got something additional to fall back on. So that, if you will, there are more coping mechanisms. And we avoid what often happens in crises like this, is that the poorest people cope. They may survive, but they end up poorer coming out of a crisis than going into it.
Ross?
Hi, Rosalind Jordan with Al Jazeera English. Madam Administrator, one of the complaints that we've heard from people in the more rural areas is that not that the aid isn't available, but they worry about it being diverted for political reasons. Given that there is such a pronounced effort to try to prevent widespread malnutrition and a possible famine, what is the U.S. doing to encourage the Ethiopian government to not let this sort of political diversion happen as you get closer to the communities that are really in need?
Look, making sure that assistance gets to the areas where it's needed is a priority and something we focus on in every operation we conduct. In this case, one of the things that has been done, and this has been a joint exercise of everybody responding to this, is mapping out the areas that are worst affected. So there are actually maps that show these are the areas we need food, this is when we need it, this is the level of vulnerability. So our first order effort is to follow the map. Right? So we have facts and evidence that show us where the assistance is needed the fastest and what kind of assistance. There are 2 million people who are facing acute water shortages. These are people who rely on livestock. So the evidence and the facts drive us in the first instance. We and our partners always have in place robust monitoring systems to make sure that aid gets where it needs to go. So that's basically the way that we will approach this.
Hi, Matt Lee with AP. I'm just wondering, the $500 million is since when that the U.S.
That is since the fall of 2015.
And who else has contributed? Has anyone else?
Yes, the European Union, the UK, Canada, obviously UN agencies. There is a UN appeal, and in some cases, you look at some other appeals, the response has been reasonably prompt, but it's insufficient. And so one of the things we agreed at the event we did with the Secretary General is to be a little bit more forward-leaning in saying, here's what we need by what date in order to fight and try to keep ahead of the impacts of the drought.
268 that is needed is on top of the 500
Yes.
million that you and
that's over the next 3 months.
And what everyone else has already contributed as well.
Yeah, there's a base of what's already been provided. So that's 500 million plus what others have provided. What we've done is looked out. We've got the maps. We know where people are, what the needs are, and done an estimation the UN has of here is what we need over the next 3 months to manage this in such a way that we minimize to the greatest extent possible people falling further behind, right? So just to keep on top of it for 3 months.
So what you already have in
Yes,
hand.
this is above and beyond what's already been done.
So and this is my last one. So you are hoping people will follow the U.S. lead here.
Yes, indeed.
But by contributing more money or by sending DART, their equivalent of a DART team?
Different countries respond in different ways. So I think that's their call whether they need more personnel. I think the first order business is we need the resources by date certain in order to keep ahead of this. Because as you all know very well, what too often happens is we wait until the newspaper and the televisions are littered with images of starving children. In this case, there is a great deal of human suffering now, but we think it's more prudent to get ahead of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got time
Sure.
for one more? Go ahead.
So, what can you tell us about the magnitude? 10 million people, for how many months do they need the assistance?
That's a good question. The way we look at that, I mentioned Southern Africa, for example, when we began looking at this, and one of the things we are able to do through our early warning system is look at things on a constant basis. Southern Africa is looking to be worse than we had thought. And in the case of Ethiopia, we are constantly looking at the numbers to try to determine, are we staying at 10, are we moving to 11, or are we getting ahead and moving down? So that's an iterative process that's done on a regular basis. The way those numbers will work is if there is a response that is timely, those numbers will be level for a while and come down. The longer it takes for the world to respond to this, the greater the chance that those numbers will come up. And I think if you want to follow this, we, the United Nations, and the government will be constantly updating the numbers based on the latest information that we have.
In the case of Ethiopia, how much money is the government putting forth? Because there has been an announcement.
Yeah, the government has actually put forth a fair amount of money. As I recall, and don't quote me on this, I think you should ask them for the number. They were, I think, 350, 400. No. Well, maybe that may be their number. I'm aware of the last announcement they made when I was there, which was significant. I think what is significant here is the government is responding, and they are putting money into the mix and doing their equivalent of kind of an emergency request and adding money to the budget. But I would refer to them for the exact numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Gail. Appreciate it. Well done. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Just a couple things at the top. Sure.
To this. Ethiopia needs help, and it is great that the State Department is doing this. But what would you say to Flint, Michigan residents if they ask, can you help us first?
Well, I think the president has already spoken to efforts that the federal government intends to do to continue to help the people of Flint, Michigan get through that.
As I understand, they're struggling with the budget to replace all the pipes and.
I understand. It's a fair question. I think it's a question better asked to a different federal agency than the State Department. All I can point you back to is what the president has said himself about the water crisis in Flint and the seriousness with which he is taking it and the U.S. government is taking it. But it's really not a question for me to address from this particular podium.
Taxpayer money. That's why I asked.
That's right, and I think if you look carefully, I can't speak for other agencies, but I can certainly speak for this one. We take our obligations to spend and to shepherd taxpayer dollars. We take that very, very seriously, and that there are needs for tax dollars here in the United States certainly goes without saying. There are also needs around the world, and that's our focus here at the State Department, is how we're marshaling and using the funds that we're given every year around the world. And I would remind you that, as the Secretary said when he testified last week, it's the State Department budget is about 1% of the federal budget. So, $1 out of every 100 goes to State Department equities, and I think, quite frankly, for that small percentage, the American people are being well served by the work that diplomats are doing all over the world and the kinds of aid and assistance that we're providing, such as the one that Ms. Smith talked about. Okay, pivoting to some other issues on Zika. I wanted to let you know that as part of our efforts here at the State Department to combat Zika at home and abroad, Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources Heather Higginbottom is hosting a briefing today with over 70 foreign diplomats here in Washington, D.C. To help assess affected country needs, inform foreign missions of the U.S. government's response efforts, and to provide the latest scientific information available on the virus. Senior officials not only from the State Department but from the Department of Health and Human Services, including CDC and NIH, as well as USAID, are also going to be participating in that briefing. Also today, and I think you saw this on the public schedule, the Secretary is meeting with Special Representative to the UN Secretary General on Libya, Martin Kobler, to discuss next steps following the February 23rd endorsement of the cabinet signed by a majority from the Libyan House of Representatives. We remain focused on supporting Libyans as they usher in the unified government of National Accord Cabinet. And it's critical, we believe, that this process move forward immediately. Many courageous Libyan leaders are striving to meet their responsibilities under the Libyan political agreement, while a few seek to evade them and obstruct the progress. We in the international community must support Libyans as they move forward and prevent spoilers from holding the process hostage. We strongly condemn attempts to obstruct that process. We also support, as I said before, the Special Representative's effort to reconvene the Libyan political dialogue in Tunis next week to move the process forward. And we note the important role of the Libyan political dialogue, whose members have already done so much to make reconciliation, once so remote, a real possibility now. We also remain focused on backing incoming Prime Minister al-Sarraj and the Government of National Accord as they take their rightful place in Tripoli. Only by seating, and we've said this before, an inclusive, functioning government in the capital can Libya begin to restore its unity, regain stability, and rebuild the economy. And we're committed to providing the unified government full political backing and technical, economic, humanitarian, security, and counterterrorism assistance as requested. I would remind again, we've talked about, the role that groups like Daesh are trying to play in places like Libya, and we've said before. I mean, the best antidote to a group like Daesh is good governance, and that's really what we're trying to seek in Libya, is good governance through a political process. So the Secretary is meeting actually with the Special Representative as we speak, and we'll have a short readout of it when it's complete, probably from me. With that, Matt.
Right. I don't really have anything big, but just or worldwide import. But the Senate just a few minutes ago, Senator Udall asked for unanimous consent to confirm Roberta Jacobson to be ambassador to Mexico. Senator Risch objected on behalf of himself and Senator Rubio, who apparently is not in town today for some reason. I'm just wondering, is this responsible foreign policy position for lawmakers to take?
What, objecting to?
Because they're objecting, and at least one senator is objecting because of Ambassador designate Jacobson's role in negotiating the normalization with Cuba.
Well, as you know, Matt, there is an advise and a consent process. There's an advise and consent responsibility for the United States Senate, and nobody takes that more seriously than Secretary Kerry, who served for 29 years on the Senate, and he understands there's that role. That said, he continues to urge for her immediate a vote and her immediate confirmation in the post as U.S. Ambassador to Mexico. That's not an unimportant post, and she is supremely qualified for it. This is an important relationship here in the Western Hemisphere, and the Secretary firmly believes that it's time to get her confirmed and in place. And it's one thing, certainly there's a role that the Senate has to play here, but at a certain point, it does become an obstruction to our ability to conduct the foreign policy of the United States, particularly when the objections are not related, in some cases, to an individual's qualifications for the job or their potential to do it. And this particular nomination, as you know, has been held up for an inordinate amount of time, and the Secretary does believe that it's past time to vote on it and get her confirmed and get her down there to Mexico City.
Yeah. Well, my question is, do you think that it's a responsible position for senators to take to block this nomination, or is it irresponsible?
I'm not going to characterize individual senators' behavior. There's an advise and consent. We believe that the process has gone on too long, that the reasons for obstructing her confirmation have not been founded on suitable grounds about her qualifications or her potential to be a terrific ambassador for the United States and Mexico, and therefore it needs to end. We want to vote on her confirmation.
What has been harmed between in the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico
It's
because
not
there's
no
no
about,
ambassador?
It's not about what's been harmed, Roz. It's just the gap has been too long in terms of when she was nominated until now, and it doesn't exactly speak well of the United States' real and honest commitment to the relationship with Mexico when we can't even get our ambassador confirmed and down there. So it's certainly not helping to further our foreign policy goals with Mexico on some very important issues. And again, as the Secretary said himself right from this podium, you need your talent out there, and nobody's more talented or capable for this post than Roberta Jacobson, and we want to see her confirmed.
Mr. Kobler, you mentioned that you guys had a meeting with Martin Kobler. Now, he said yesterday that he basically failed in his efforts, failed in his mission completely. The implicit message being that he's just giving up on the process. So, did you convince him otherwise? Where do we stand?
Today's meeting isn't about convincing him otherwise, and I'll let Mr. Kobler speak for his comments. We obviously don't consider this process failed at all. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why the Secretary is looking forward so much to this meeting. There has been progress, as I alluded to in my opening statement, in terms of getting a cabinet named. And starting to get some of the political institutions in place. So there's been real progress, but there are a few entities and individuals that are trying to obstruct that. They are the ones who are failing what the Libyan people need and what they want. And it's not Mr. Kobler or his efforts or his leadership. And as I said at the outset, we're going to continue to support what he's trying to do.
And one last question on Libya. There are a lot of reports that suggest that the United States, as well as Europe, or European governments may be more and more getting inclined to perhaps be part of the military attacks or attacking Daesh and ISIS and other groups and so on. Is that
In
the case?
Libya?
In Libya, yes. Are you headed in that direction?
I'm not going to speak for other nations and what sovereign decisions they might be making with respect to military operations. That's for them to speak to. I'm also, as you know, reluctant to speak about even U.S. military operations from this podium. I will just go back to what I think the Secretary has said so well. The goal here has to be getting this government of national accord seated and in place, so that real political progress can be made in Libya. Because, as we've said before, we believe the real antidote to groups like Daesh and to terrorism and extremism writ large is good governance. And obviously we're not at that place in Libya right now. So that's what he wants to see happen, and that's what we're going to be focused on here from the State Department. That said, the Commander-in-Chief has made it clear, and I believe, and I won't speak for DOD, but I can certainly point you to comments that Secretary Carter and General Dunford made as recently as a few days ago, that we have to protect the American people from the threat of terrorism. And we've made no bones about the fact that the United States will do that where and when needed. There has been, and DOD has spoken to this, there has been military action taken against Daesh in Libya by the United States, and I can't certainly rule that out in the future. But I won't speak to specific operations. And what other nations decide to do, I think they should speak to that. But I want to come back to the core issue. What we want here in the United States, and what it's clear, as I said in my opening statement, the international community wants, is real political progress there. Because, again, that's the ultimate sustainable solution to combating extremism. All right. Pam?
North Korea?
Yeah.
Does the U.S. consider North Korea's decision to fire projectiles as a provocation? And if so, will there be any additional response beyond the U.S. and UN sanctions that were imposed yesterday?
Well, I've seen the reports of these missile shots that they allegedly took. I'm actually not in a position right now to independently confirm that they actually did that. But let's just assume for a moment that they did. Not exactly surprising. It's typical of the kind of response that we have seen from them in the past. Is it provocative? Absolutely, it is. There's no doubt about that. It is just if true that they fired off these missiles, it would just be another example of increasingly provocative, unnecessarily provocative conduct by Pyongyang. That only underscores the importance of the resolution that was passed yesterday and the resolve of the international community in a unified way to enact more robust measures. Now, I'm not at all in a position to predict what, if any, additional measures might be taken by the UN or by any other nation with respect to these reports of these latest missile launches. I wouldn't get ahead of that. What we want to see, what we're focused on right now is now that this resolution is passed, is making sure that it gets enforced in a robust manner.
Yesterday, after the resolution passed, the Chinese ambassador to the UN once again suggested that it might be a good idea to have peace talks operate in parallel alongside the six-party denuclearization talks. I know that you guys have spoken to this many times, but since he's raised it again, is there any interest at all in the United States, inside the administration, for this, to do this?
Well, I think the Secretary actually addressed this when Foreign Minister Wang Yi was here last week, when he talked about that we haven't ruled out the possibility that there could sort of be some sort of parallel process here. But, and this is not a small but, there has to be denuclearization on the peninsula and work through the six-party process to get there. So I don't think we're in a position to rule out possible discussions on a peace process, but we're not going to decouple that in any way from what really needs to happen, which is complete denuclearization and adherence to the six-party process moving forward.
Does that mean that it is not, the administration does not rule out having talks to finally make the armistice permanent before there is a resolution to the nuclear?
I didn't say that. I said,
Well,
as the
that's
Secretary
I'm
said,
trying to find out. It
as-
sounded like you're talking about parallel, which
the
means.
Secretary said that he wouldn't rule out the possibility that there could be discussions about a peace, a resolution of the armistice.
A parallel track
But-
before
But
the resolution.
there's
of the
not going to be,
nuclear
let me make it very clear.
issue. All right, yes, please.
There's nothing is going to change about our belief that first and foremost there has to be denuclearization. And as we talked about before, when the North Koreans floated this idea, and we made it clear that we weren't even going to begin to have that discussion until denuclearization was factored in, then it all kind of collapsed at that point. So nothing has changed about our position and our policy on denuclearization.
So there has to be denuclearization, and then you can contemplate a peace
I don't want to
process.
get ahead of every bit of the process, but nothing's changed on our policy that denuclearization has to be a part of this, and the six-party talks is the process and the vehicle to do that. Thus far, the North has shown no willingness or even the ability to consider returning to that process, but that's the right process, that's the vehicle, and that's how we want to pursue this.
Syria?
Yeah.
Can we go Syria? Okay. Today, the Russian Foreign Ministry said that in the last 24 hours, there were 14 violations of the ceasefire, basically attacks around Damascus and other areas, populated centers, but mainly against government positions or installations and so on. Can you confirm what the Russians are saying, and have the violations been committed only by opposition groups or by the Syrian forces?
I can't. I can't confirm those numbers, those reports. I've seen the press reports of these Russian estimates. They can speak for that if they want. As I said from the very outset, we aren't going to get into a daily tally here. We have seen claims of violations. We want those claims to be reviewed and evaluated. As we said, there's a process in place to do that. We've also seen, and over the last 24 hours, there hasn't been, in our estimates, not any significant new numbers of alleged violations. I'm not ruling out that there hasn't been alleged violations, but again, I'm not going to get into tallying the number. If the Russians want to do that, they can do that.
So would you concur with the UN envoy, Staffan de Mistura? I said the ceasefire is largely holding. I mean, there have been some violations, but it looks like, it is something that can go on. It can have more.
Yeah, I think we would agree with that it generally does appear to be holding, and that's an encouraging sign, continues to be encouraging. But we're not taking anything for granted here. We're only into, less than a week of this. So we're going to keep watching it very, very closely.
But the fact that it held for 6 days is a good thing.
It's
a good sign.
absolutely, look, in that it is generally holding, certainly is better for the Syrian people and the potential for real political progress in Syria, which is ultimately the goal here. But that doesn't mean that we're turning a blind eye to claims and allegations of violations, or that we think that they are any less important. They aren't. We take them very seriously. We want everybody to take them seriously. And as I said, there's a process in place to have them vetted and to be reviewed. The right number of violations needs to be 0, and we're not at 0 now. So I want to be clear that we take these seriously, and we're not walking away from it. But yes, that it has largely held, and that there is a clear reduction in violence in Syria is certainly a good thing, and we'd like to see that trend not only continue, but actually improve over time. I mean, the war's been going on now we're almost at the 5-year anniversary here, the middle of this month, 5 years. And for the first time in 5 years, there is actually a downward trend in the organized violence against the Syrian people. I mean, like you, I read the news, and I read a story this morning about people in Aleppo actually now being able to come out, and markets are opening up, and kids are playing in playgrounds. That's encouraging. That's what you want to see. But it's still fragile, and we're going to keep watching it.
A quick question. I mean, you certainly have assets that you can, or means to determine or detect who's violating the ceasefire. I mean, would you say that the Syrian government has, by and large, upheld its end of the bargain?
I would say that we have many means of learning about potential violations, and we continue to see indications of potential violations. I'm going to continue, however, from this podium to refrain from tallying them up or pointing a finger. There's a process in place for them to be reviewed and evaluated. We need to let that process work its way out, and I just don't think that it would be helpful to that process or to the ultimate goals for us to get into a daily tick-tock of each and every one. Arshad?
Change of topic.
Are you on Syria? Okay.
Is Brian Fagliano, who was the person who helped set up and manage former Secretary Clinton's private email server, still a contractor at the department?
No.
And do you have any comment on the reports that, well, actually, two things. One, do you know when he ceased to be a contractor? Because I believe he was one until September of last year.
All I can talk about for privacy considerations and restrictions is his time when he was employed as an IT specialist at the GS-15 level, as a government employee from May 2009 through February 2013 in the Bureau of Information Resource Management. I'm not able, again, for privacy restrictions, to go beyond that.
Mark confirmed in a briefing in September, though, that he was still a contractor.
I would just point you back to my answer to your first question in terms of whether he still is employed as one, and he is not.
Do you have any comment on the reports that he has been granted immunity so as to be able to immunity from prosecution, so as to be able to discuss his activities on her behalf?
No, I'm not going to comment, as I've not commented before on ongoing reviews and investigations.
Sorry, why exactly can't you say if someone is employed as a contractor?
I'm not able to provide additional details because of privacy restrictions.
Can you cite the privacy restriction?
No, I can't. But I'm not going to comment.
You can't cite the restriction that you say prevents you from talking about.
I don't have additional details about his follow-on employment at the State Department.
Can you find out, because I don't think that's, I challenge whether or not you are able to talk about employment status of contractors for privacy reasons.
Or former contractors, and I'm
specifically.
Yeah.
It may not be that there are privacy regulations necessarily, but the fact that there are ongoing reviews and investigations, and I'm not going to provide any more detail than I was able to already. I already answered the question about whether he is. Is he still employed here at the State Department?
State Department employee, yes, you did answer that question.
And I also answered the question about whether he was still employed as a contractor, and the answer to that is no.
Yeah,
so there's no
the answer,
tie to him right now.
The question he asked those are great answers, but
Yes, they were.
but they weren't the answers to they didn't address the question, which is when did he stop being a contractor?
And I did answer that question. I said, I'm not going to get into that for privacy restrictions.
That's not an answer.
It is an
Are you-
answer.
are
You just don't
sure-
like the answer.
Are you sure, Kirby, that there is a privacy restriction that bars you from saying when somebody ceased to be a contractor
I'm
with
not
the
an
State Department?
expert on every privacy regulation here, but I've gone about as far on this one as I can. And as you know, there are reviews and investigations underway, and I'm just not able to speak
Would you
about it.
mind double checking?
We'll take that question and happy to get back to you on that. But I'm not going to go any further than I just did.
What kind of data has the U.S. shared with Dutch investigators on the downing of MH17? I asked Mark Turner about this yesterday. He said he would look into it. I wonder if you have anything.
Yeah, I'm actually not going to be able to give you a lot of information on that.
Do you know if the data included satellite images or radar data?
As I said, I'm not going to be able to give you much on that. There is an active, still an active review going on, and I'd refer you to the Dutch government on that review. We have been and will continue to assist as is appropriate, but I'm not going to be able to give you much more detail on that.
Has there been?
You didn't give any detail at all.
Well, I said-
not much more there's none.
Well,
Can
look,
you confirm?
that's a
at
subjective
least-
opinion on your part. I thought I gave information. I said that we're helping. I'm just not going to talk about exactly what we're helping with.
Okay, but you did give them some kind of information.
We
Yes.
continue to work with the Joint Investigation Team and law enforcement authorities, but I'm
Does
not
that-
going to go into the details
Does
of
that mean
cooperation.
that you have given them, I'm not asking what specifically, does that mean you've given them information?
It means that we've continued to communicate and
Well, I don't know what
assist
that
them.
means. We're continuing to communicate right now, but I'm not getting any answers and no one else is here. So what does that mean? Continue to communicate? Have
It
you or
means
have
that
you
we are
not given
cooperating with
any
them and
information?
assisting them
Does
in their
that-
efforts. I'm not going to get
does
into
that
the
mean
details
that
of
you-
what that is.
But that answer means nothing, though. Have you given them information, data, any kind?
I've answered the question.
Has there been a request from Dutch investigators for radar data or satellite images from
You
the U.S.?
can contact Dutch authorities and ask them about the progress of their investigative efforts and what they've needed and how they're doing on it. I'm not going to be able to give any more information. Samir, did you have a question?
Yeah, the environmental activist Berta Caceres was murdered early yesterday in her home west of the capital of Honduras. Does the State Department have a comment on her murder?
Well, I think our embassy's already put out a statement on that. We certainly condemn her murder. And we call for a prompt, professional, and thorough investigation into the crime and for those responsible to be held accountable by the Honduran justice system.
How confident is the U.S. government that the Honduran government is going to be capable of carrying out a fair and prompt investigation into her murder? In the past 2 weeks, she and her family were detained by local and state authorities and harassed because of their ongoing activism against the construction of a dam in that area.
Well,
And she was very afraid for her life, and she was on the
what I
record
can
as
tell you
saying
is we've
so.
offered Honduran authorities any assistance that they might require as they work on this investigation. As I said, we'd like a prompt, professional, and thorough one done, obviously, and we're going to continue to offer whatever assistance they might require. I don't want to get ahead of that process and sort of prejudge it in any way. I don't think that would be a good thing to do.
Just one more. The NGO Global Witness says that for indigenous activists, particularly in the environmental area, Honduras is the most dangerous country in the world for them to try to protect their communities from multinational corporations coming in and taking over their land and their resources. Does the U.S. share this NGO's concern about the risk to political activists in countries such as Honduras?
I haven't seen that particular report, so I'm not able to comment on that or offer a qualitative assessment. We take very seriously the threats to our citizens abroad everywhere, as well as to those that are trying to do the important work of so many non-governmental organizations. and we monitor it as best we can. But I'm not in a position to specifically, make a qualitative assessment based on that finding. But obviously, we take it seriously.
John, I have a question about the refugee crisis
Okay.
in Greece and Turkey. It's a long question, and be patient with me because I have some numbers. In January and February this year, 122,637 people reached Greece, all of them through Turkey. 46% are Syrians, 23% are Afghans, 18% Iraqis. 410 people died the last 2 months in Aegean, among them many children. Last year, over 800,000 entered Greece from Turkey, and this happened with the help of illegal traffickers. I know the position of the United States government, the Secretary, about traffickers and trafficking. I'm not going to read his code. Given that Turkey was already, according to the Department of State trafficking report, a country with problems, what the U.S. government has done to prevent one of the largest human trafficking in human history. And also, are you considering that maybe instead of allow human trafficking in the industry in Turkey to flourish, to find a way to transfer Syrian refugees from Turkey to the countries of interest legally and with safety, as Greece is proposing?
You're right. That is a very long question.
I know. Sorry, I apologize.
It's okay. It took you a long time to write it out,
Yes.
too, I'm sure.
Yes.
Look, in all seriousness, human trafficking and migrant smuggling are distinct crimes, and many smuggling cases don't involve human trafficking. We understand this is a complex set of challenges and that many European nations are struggling under the continuing influx of people seeking safety. We also know that our EU partners are committed to implementing initiatives that member states have agreed on to meet those challenges. We continue to hope, and you've heard the Secretary talk about this, that European nations will build upon their progress to date. He just met with Foreign Minister Steinmeier from Germany just a few days ago, where they had a very extensive discussion about what EU nations are doing, and Germany's leadership in particular. But we want them to build on their progress and to successfully implement a comprehensive and coordinated solution that focuses on saving lives and ensuring that the human rights of all migrants are respected. Obviously, we all, and I mean all, everybody, still needs to do more. And that's why the President is hosting a high-level event on refugees at the UN General Assembly in September with the aim of expanding the humanitarian safety net and creating more long-term, durable opportunities. It's also why he ordered that we take in an additional 10,000 Syrian refugees this year. All of this is going to require a vigorous and sustained effort to secure new and significant commitments. And obviously to provide greater access to education and employment opportunities for these refugees, not just for the millions of Syrian refugees, but for those fleeing intense strife and persecution all over the globe. So we strongly urge countries that are bordering areas of conflict to continue to develop solutions that prioritize saving lives, addressing the humanitarian needs of all migrants and refugees, and to provide the protection that they need for those who can't return. Okay? Yes.
Can I follow up with the question on Turkey? Sure. I mean, Turkey is one of your biggest allies. Yet, in many ways, it's like a thorn in the side, because it seems, there seem to be elements in Turkey that benefit from trafficking of, in this case, human trafficking, then oil trafficking, arms trafficking, the trafficking of militias and so on into Syria and all these things. It seems to be really an obstinate kind of ally in this fight, and this horrible tragedy that bedeviled Syria in the last 5 years. Would you
Is that a question or a
I
statement?
just want you, because every time we ask about Turkey, you guys emphasize that it's a great ally, it's a major ally, NATO,
It is.
but it seems to be really on always on the other side, so to speak.
Turkey is an important ally, and they're an important partner. And they are contributing in significant ways to the fight against Daesh as part of a coalition member. And I would remind you, they have 2.5 million Syrian refugees on their side of the border that they are still trying to care for. And it's a border that better than most that remains still a dangerous place. So they are contributing. Look, and Mark, I think, addressed this yesterday. We obviously aren't going to agree on everything. And we've been open and candid with Turkish leaders on issues regarding the situation in Syria that we don't agree on, and that kind of candid conversation will continue. But this isn't some theoretical exercise for the Turks. I mean, it's right there. It's right there along their border, and there's real, tangible, practical implications and impacts to them and to their people. And we understand that. And though we may not agree on every aspect, we are going to continue to work at it diligently with Turkish leaders to try to move forward and to try to help eliminate what is clearly a common threat to both of us, which is Daesh. Yeah, in the back. I'll come to you in a minute, sir.
My name is Thanos Dimadis. I represent the biggest media organization in Greece. It's called Alpha TV, channel station of Greece.
Welcome.
My question is about Turkey. As you know, today, I think you know about that, the Greek Prime Minister, Mr. Tsipras, had a telephone conversation with the Prime Minister of Turkey, Mr. Davutoglu. According to some Greek media reports, and as far as I know about that, Mr. Tsipras expressed his concerns to Mr. Davutoglu about the role of Turkey regarding Turkey's commitment to stop the flows of immigrants from Turkey to Greece and the rest of Europe. I would like to know whether the Department of State is satisfied, or how does the State Department assessing the Turkish policy according to the implementation of the Turkish commitment to stop these flows of immigrants?
As I said, this isn't a theoretical practice issue for the Turks. It's very real. 2.5 million people, and they're working at it very, very hard. In fact, much of the millions of dollars that the United States, billions that we contribute to this effort, and it's more than $5 billion now, goes to places like Turkey and Jordan to try to help them better take care of the refugees that are there, because we think it's preferable if they stay close by, so that when there is a home for them in Syria, they can go back home and they can do so in a fairly much easier manner. There's no question that some refugees are making these decisions on their own, that they're going to leave. And I know the Turkish government is aware of that and doing what they can to try to provide for those refugees as best they can. But they can't stop each and every individual or family from if they want to move. We obviously discourage that movement as well, because we want them to stay there. But obviously people are going to make that decision, and they're going to go. I can't speak to the discussions between those two governments, and I'll let them characterize what they discuss. What I'll tell you is we recognize it's a tough challenge. We recognize that Turkey's trying very, very hard to deal with it. That's why we are also a major contributor financially to this. And as I said earlier, when in my other answer on this issue, that we want all the nations in Europe to work together to find comprehensive solutions and to try to work through this as best they can, understanding that they have very real economic issues to deal with, as well as security issues of their own. We certainly understand that, but we believe that that EU nations, all nations on the continent, actually, the best way to deal with this is to deal with it together in a unified, comprehensive way.
So in contrast to some European nations and some European states, that they are not very satisfied by the way that Turkey is trying to fulfill its commitment, the Department of State thinks that Turkey is doing its best.
I won't speak for what other nations may feel. We recognize the challenges that Turkey is facing on this. And as I said earlier, we also recognize that everybody can do more. Everybody can do better. I didn't say that there isn't efforts that everybody can make. Everybody, including the United States, can do more and can do better. And so what we want is to see everybody step up to that challenge.
I'm very sorry. One last question. Do you salute the way that FYROM is treating the refugees trying to pass their borders and going throughout Europe? I mean, are you satisfied by the way? I'm sure that you've seen the images.
Am I satisfied by the efforts of who?
Of FYROM. We don't accept the term Macedonia, so I'm going to call it FYROM. Are you satisfied by the way that FYROM is treating the refugees
I
who
can
are like
appreciate.
stuck in Greece.
Try to get FEROM in your response.
I can appreciate.
And I would appreciate if you respond by using the name FEROM.
I'm sure that you would. I'm sure that you would appreciate that as well. I'm going to go back to what I said before. I'm not going to get into a tit for tat or to speaking to each and every European nation and what they are or they're not doing. They can speak to that. We've been very open and honest about the fact that we believe everybody can do more and everybody can do better to address this incredibly difficult challenge, the worst refugee crisis that we've seen since World War II. And we want everybody to do more and everybody to do better, and we put ourselves right in that group too. Okay?
Even Greece can do more.
We want everybody to do more and to address this in a comprehensive way. Look, I think you could just look at the sheer numbers of people that are making this difficult decision to move, and the crisis and how it's affecting everybody. Everybody's being touched by it, and therefore everybody has a responsibility to address it. Samir?
What's the U.S. reaction to the Arab Interior Ministers and the Council, the Gulf Cooperation Council? They designated the Hezbollah, the Lebanese party, as a terrorist organization.
Yeah, I would just say we've noted that they've made that decision, as you well know, since the mid to late 90s. The United States has long ago characterized or addressed them as an FTO, designated them as an FTO.
I mean, do you see this development are you concerned from this development that may lead to a new conflict in Lebanon?
Nobody wants new conflict, obviously, but I would let these states speak for themselves and to their decision to so designate. Again, we've made our decision about Hezbollah a long time ago. Okay? Yeah, go.
Different question.
Yeah.
Question on human rights, a general question. Every year, State Department issues a human rights reports, and UN also has a declaration of human rights, and plus Secretary meets a lot of leaders from around the globe as far as human rights are concerned. But in many ways, do you agree that maybe these talks with those leaders, countries, and all that who violates human rights, especially on women and trafficking and all that, doesn't work? But whenever there is a documentary comes out, now I'm talking in this case, a documentary, Oscar-winning documentary on Pakistani woman, that did work. The documentary did work. Law was changed in Pakistan the very next day by the Prime Minister. But as far as human rights, so far these books and all those talks really doesn't work. Do you agree with me that there should be more documentaries on those violations and all around the globe? Including on India also, there was documentary and it did work.
Do I think there should be more documentaries about human rights? Is that the question? I think, look, anything that can shed a light on human rights violations and the issues that so many people are facing around the world is a good thing. I mean, I'm not an expert in how documentaries get made, but look, if through whatever media it is or medium it is, if it can shed a light on this kind of suffering, then that's a good thing. Especially if that kind of spotlight can also lead to legislative changes that make things better for people all around the world. We certainly would be in support of that. I got time for one more. Pam?
Does State Department finance any documentaries? Let's say if this
Are we planning any?
State Department, do
No,
they
not that
finance
I'm
any
aware of.
documentaries on the topics that it may help? It may save the time and money from the State Department if people make more documents, especially, let's say, violations against women in Saudi Arabia. There's no documentary, but somebody is willing to make, but it costs.
Again, if a documentary can lead to shedding light on this kind of human suffering that can, again, lead to legislative changes that alleviates that suffering, certainly that's a good thing. And I think everybody would welcome that kind of thing. But if you're asking, do we have a concerted or sort of dedicated program to try to encourage that kind of, we don't. I mean, we do have significant cultural diplomacy efforts, but we're not, we don't have an office that's set up to try to get documentaries made about particular topics. Pam, last question.
I have a couple on Russia, Ukraine. The first one is a Russian court has delayed the case involving Nadia Savchenko, who's the Ukrainian pilot who was detained in connection to the deaths of 2 Russian journalists. She responded by launching a hunger strike.
Yeah, I've seen those reports. Yeah.
The State Department has previously called on Russia to release her. What is the position that you're taking now, considering there's a greater urgency in her situation?
The same position we have taken. She needs to be released. We've said that all along. She's been detained for no good reason, and we want to see her released and sent home where she belongs. And that, again, I can't confirm the hunger strike. We've certainly seen the press reports that certainly doesn't make this any easier, and certainly would. We want her released immediately, regardless. But obviously, if she is in fact launching a hunger strike, then certainly now her health would be an added issue to increase the urgency on that. But she needs to be released. We've said that all along.
And in reference to the foreign ministers meeting in Paris on the Minsk agreement today, there's been a lot of U.S. criticism of Russia for backing the rebels in Ukraine and violating provisions in the agreement. But does the U.S. share those concerns about Kiev because of its failure to push through with the election law for the Donbass region that would set the stage for a vote later this year?
So a couple of things. First, we still continue to want to see Minsk fully implemented, and we believe there's continued work that needs to be done on both sides to get Minsk fully implemented. There's no question about that. On Kyiv, they are making some progress. Obviously, there's more progress that needs to be made on reforms. The Secretary met with President Poroshenko when we were in Munich not too long ago, and he talked about that with the President. We continue to have those discussions with Ukrainian leaders. We recognize that political reform is important, not just to the stability of their government, but to the Ukrainian people, and we want to see that continue to progress.
Do you think it's possible for Ukraine to implement its obligation to increase autonomy in eastern Ukraine before Russia removes its troops and releases control of the Russia-Ukraine border?
We want to see is Minsk fully implemented, which means people pull back from the line of contact, the heavy weapons, the troops as well, that the violations cease, and I think the expectations on the government in Kyiv are well known, and they know what their obligations are under Minsk, and we want to see them fully meet those obligations. Thanks, guys. Got to go.